Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. What on earth is happening with London Irish? That's what I'm going to speak about in this video. Going to try and sum up the deadline that's been put in place by the RFU and just everything around this situation. Try and bring you up to speed. Make sure you drop a comment down below though, because this is not the first time we've seen this season in the English Premiership. It's not even the second time. I'm sure many of you will want to have your say in the comment section down below. And also, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, then I really appreciate it. But let's get into it. So as I say, not for the first time this season, financial uncertainty is plaguing the Gallagher Premiership. London Irish are the latest side to have a lot of news articles circulating about them, which you probably wouldn't really want to see, even though their season is over. So this is the situation at the moment. They've been set a deadline by the RFU, and there are concerns about whether they'll be able to take part in the Premiership next season, because the RFU have basically said that the takeover of the club needs to be completed by the end of May. So the background to this is many of you, particularly if you're fans of London Irish or just fans of the Premiership more generally, would have been aware of the fact that there has been a reported takeover in the works, rumours going on about that for quite a while now in terms of London Irish. The financial stability of the club is something which isn't really new to rugby fans. There's been rumours for a long time. When we saw everything that happened with Wasps and Worcester earlier this season, where both clubs went into administration, both clubs have dropped out of the league, and in Worcester's case it looks like they're going to have to drop all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid. Wasps, we hope, although they still have to meet all the criteria set to them by the RFU, we hope they'll be in the Championship next year. So had massive impact on those clubs, on the supporters, on the players, on all the staff, and now we have a similar thing with London Irish. And as I say, for quite a long time really, I've been hearing rumours, and there have been rumours out there, that the club financially isn't in a great position. It's reported that they're in £30 million of debt. The current owner, Mick Crossan, who has been at the helm, who's owned the club for quite a long time now, has basically said he'll sell it for £1. He wants out. He's not trying to make money off of this. I think he's got to the point where financially he can't keep losing money, or at least doesn't want to keep losing money in London Irish and in that club and in that venture. So he wants to sell the club, and there has been this takeover kind of bubbling away, which I'll get onto more in just a moment. I suppose, why is there this deadline by the RFU? A lot of you might be asking why, when the season's just finished, and particularly given we've got the World Cup coming up, why has this deadline been placed on London Irish now when the season's finished? And it's basically because of what I mentioned already. It's because of what happened with Worcester and with Wasps at the start of the season. And you might remember after that, the RFU, Premiership Rugby, the heads of those organisations got dragged up in front of a parliamentary select committee and got absolutely roasted, basically. They were accused of being asleep at the wheel in both instances of those clubs, of allowing owners who didn't have the funds in place, particularly in Worcester's situation, to take over Premiership clubs, and basically not doing enough to prevent those institutions of English rugby from going down a really dire financial situation. So this is the RFU and Premiership Rugby, who will be very involved in this as well. This is them taking a far more proactive approach, really. They want to make sure that when it gets to the start of next season, that London Irish are able to compete in the Premiership. They want those guarantees in place, because at the start of the season we're currently just about to finish, obviously Worcester and Wasps dropped out of the league. A lot of the budgets had already been taken up for players, so it was hard for players to find new clubs. It made a complete mess and a mockery of the season, really. I think the impact of those two clubs going into administration had a big impact on the season, just in terms of the fixture list getting all messed up. It had a real impact. So the RFU and Premiership Rugby are trying to avoid that scenario. They want to understand what the situation is before we get to the start of next season. So the criteria for this deadline is essentially London Irish, by the 30th of May, by the end of the month, they need to prove that they're financially viable for next season. So for the takeover to go through, the reports that are in all the papers at the moment, what they essentially need to prove is that they financially are able to look after the club, I think at least until the end of next season. I'm not quite sure the time frame of what sort of funds they need or long-term planning, that sort of thing, but they can at least take over the club and financially support them in the short to medium term. If the takeover doesn't go through, then they would still need some sort of assurances of, okay, how is this being funded going forward? Whether that would be the current owner stepping back in and continuing to foot the bill and lose money and hope for another takeover elsewhere, we don't know. But those are the two things that basically need to happen for the criteria and that deadline to be passed and London Irish to be part of the Premiership next year. Part of all this as well, of course, is the fact that players have been getting paid late on time. So the prospective new owners, which many of you might have seen in the press, is an American Consortium. And Ray Lewis, who's a former linebacker in the NFL, very well-known player amongst any fans of the NFL, retired player. Also some very well-known basketball players, Allen Iverson, players like that as well in the mix. So a lot of American sports stars, I suppose, part of that consortium that want to take the club over. So that consortium stepped in and paid the players, I believe it was for their April salaries, or maybe it was the one before that. And then we had the recent situation, I think it was the one before that, in fact, that the consortium stepped in. Then for the April salaries, they once again weren't paid on time, and the current owner, Mick Crossham, had to step in and pay those players those wages. So it's been a complete mess already. And I think why this is such a big story and why it is such a concern is because we've been hearing the same noises out of this as we heard out of Wasps and Worcester. I remember being sat at Twickenham at the Premiership launch and speaking to people at Wasps about what's the situation. Do you feel confident you'll be okay? And they all said, yep, we think we'll be okay because we trust in the people we've got in charge. And likewise with Worcester, we heard a lot of rumours about their takeover. It's almost completed. They're just finishing off the final parts of the deal. It's going to be done, etc., etc. It wasn't done, and we are where we are now with those clubs not part of the Premiership. So I think that's why this is so concerning, is because we've lost our trust in these processes to give us the outcomes that we want to have. We've seen what has happened before. We know the consequences of this not going through, of the finances not being secure for London Irish, and the impact it's going to have on the fans, on the players, and on the staff at that club. And also more generally, if we want to look at English rugby, you think about London Irish and you feel like they've finally got themselves a home. They're back playing in London at the G-Tech, brilliant part of London, the correct area for them in terms of the southwest to be based. They're playing excellent rugby, knocking on the door of the top four, and then they have this hanging over them. So it's a massive, massive shame. And obviously, if this was to happen, what happens to all those players? With the salary cap coming down for all the other clubs, what happens there with those players? Would Premiership Rugby and the RFU maybe step in to try and help them get clubs elsewhere? There are so many question marks over this that let's hope they meet that deadline, everything goes through, and it's all good. But that is kind of a summary of where we are at the moment. And hopefully, going forward, we'll just be able to focus on the rugby heading into next season. But that's kind of what the deadline is, why it's in place, and let's see what waits and happens. One thing I will say, actually, in terms of the RFU and Premiership Rugby, I can understand entirely from what I've said in this video why they have put a deadline in place and why they want this all dealt with before the season starts. To me, that makes a lot of sense. For all the bad things they might have done in the past, I think in this instance, that deadline, in my opinion, from what I can tell and what I've read up on, kind of makes sense. But you can let me know down below if you aren't so sure about how the RFU and how Premiership Rugby, once again, the stakeholders, the governing bodies, are dealing with this situation. I don't think I've missed anything out. I think that's kind of where we are at the moment. So I look forward to reading your comments on the situation, and fingers crossed that this all resolves itself. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.